You know, even Wall Street insiders are continuing to sound the alarm to the black swans that they're seeing. But what they don't know is that what is actually happening is quite typical in the end of every fiat currency life cycle and then reset. So, how can you solve a problem when you don't even know what the real problem is? Of course, some, but not all, of those looming crises are geopolitical risk with global conflict escalating, the increasing rise in populism that is occurring, and even those that are trying to jump on the populist train, but they're not really populists. It's occurring as the public just becomes more and more frustrated with their personal inflation experience and see that the American dream story is further and further out of their reach as the deflationary pressures of globalization shift to the inflationary pressures of deglobalization. So while we're told that inflation is slowing, interesting, it's proving way stickier and even raising and going up in a number of countries, or including the US, in different areas. And of course, those more affluent appear to be oblivious to the growing discontent of the masses. The quote is, "We begin to care when it begins to impact our lives. But by then, it'll be too late to prepare for the potential unrest." So with these and more risks swirling, global central banks are buying and holding the most gold ever in history. In fact, in 2020, 50% of central bankers surveyed held their gold offshore. But by 2023, 68% of those same central banks brought their gold home. And frankly, that trend is escalating, repatriating your gold into the future. Because what do they know? If you don't hold it, you don't own it. And we're going to talk about all of this and so much more coming up. I'm Lynette Zang, Chief Market Analyst here at ITM Trading, a full-service physical gold and silver dealer, really specializing in custom strategies, and I sure hope you have one in place. And if you don't, click that Calendly link below. Get your strategy in place because things are shifting, black swans are swirling, and any one of these things could take down the entire global system. Now, I'll grant you, this is an election year. So the likelihood is that there will at least be an attempt to keep things fairly calm through the elections. But quite honestly, things could easily get out of hand quite quickly. So let me just show you some of the things that they are looking at. I'm looking at more, but we'll take a look at what they're talking about because they're saying it's a perilous time investing pros on the next big risk. Well, there's probably more than what they're showing us. But these are three Wall Street executives weigh in on the dangers they see ahead for investors. And, frankly, it's even to maintain your standard of living. So first, we're going to look at what Wes Edens has to say, because he sees the biggest risk as geopolitical risk, and we certainly see that all around the world. But the rise of that risk over the last several years and what the real risks would be broadly, because it isn't just a conflict country to country, but it's the impact of that conflict. Who else gets involved in that conflict? Are there proxy wars going on? And how does that impact the public and inflation and the costs and the position? And I mean, we've certainly seen a breakdown in the supply chain. And we've definitely seen in some areas a de-globalization, which is deflationary. We're going to talk more about that in a minute. But 50% of the world's population is going to elect a new leader next year. So it's a particularly charged time. And aren't we seeing that here in the US? but 50% of the world population looking at new leaders. And what if those leaders fail them? I mean, we look at what's happening in South America too. I feel like we're in the big deglobalization trade. Okay. Now, globalization, as corporations went out to, say, China as an example, lowered their cost bases. And when the Chinese yuan was then pegged to the US dollar, which means it went in lockstep with it. So if the dollar went up, so did the yuan. If the dollar went down, so did the yuan. Corporations could easily determine what their profit margins were going to be. Now, the cost was steep. That's another conversation for another day. But that's what made it look to the public like that the prices on things were going down, because here were all these products that we were importing from China. And I can remember being so surprised at the prices and even in some cases the quality level of what we were seeing. So now that the reverse is happening and those supply chains are breaking and we're in a deglobalization phase of commerce, that means that is inflationary. And remember, it makes it really easy, and I might be redundant on this, but there's only one way to fight inflation, and that's with deflation. So that's what we've been doing for the past 40, 50 years. And there's only one way to fight deflation, and that's with inflation. And that's one of the reasons why I'm telling you that, in my opinion, and according to the monetary velocity and some other things I'm looking at, I believe that we are at the beginning phases of the hyperinflation, regardless of what they blah, blah, blah say. But everyone seems to think all these regional conflicts, this is key, all these regional conflicts, whether it's Israel, Hamas, or China and Taiwan, Russia, Ukraine, are going to be contained. So they're just going to stay in those little areas. I don't think they're really pricing in the possibility that something greater could happen. And part of what I'm saying to you is whenever there is a currency regime shift, I mean, 100% of the time, when there is a currency regime shift, there is war, there is chaos. So you're looking over here while what they're doing is over here. And so you just fall right into their plan. They have a plan. Do you? If not, get one. Click that Calendly link. Get a plan. So it's a perilous time for both economies as well as individuals. Because what do you think the chances are of a spillover? What do you think the chances are of a misstep? What do you think those chances are? And are you ready for the consequences of them? Because there is a slew of new conflicts that could erupt in 2024. And we already have a slew of conflicts that erupted in 22 and 23. While the world is watching over here, there's so many other things that could be happening. And one of them is the conflict between the US and China. And these are the two big global powerhouses. And, when people get stubborn and they just stay in a direction and they put their blinders on, maybe they can't see what's happening in their peripheral vision. So, she warned Biden during the summit that Beijing will reunify Taiwan with China. That's something that the US and probably many of the allies won't go for. But I will be working with Democrat and Republican senators to do two things quickly. First, create a robust defense supplemental for Taiwan. And second, draft pre-invasion sanctions from hell to impose on China if they take action to seize Taiwan. I believe there is strong bipartisan support to stand up to Chinese communist aggression. You think we're going to be in war with China? You think that's a possibility? It's a possibility. Are they really battling a war, or are they really distracting us? I can't say. What we know is that the regime is shifting. And we also know that all the red flags are there. And on top of that, there is a shortage of means to resolve conflict. So the conflict happens, and the world has certainly seen what the US will do and their SWIFT system. And we know that China has done quite a bit to counter that with the BRICS. But there's a lot of geopolitical competition and less appetite for resolving these deadly conflicts. World War III, anybody? Take your pick. And what I was saying, it has become quite obvious the rise of populism. This isn't new. What happened in 2020 kind of quashed a lot of this, but as I've been showing you, that is rising again. And you can even liken that or witness that with the rise of the unions. But can Biden convince Americans his brand of populism is better than Trump's? And are they really for the people? I don't know. I don't get political. I stay economic because there's not one doubt in my mind, but that whoever controls the money is really controlling what's happening, and politicians are there to legalize the theft. But it's really the central banks. But whichever version wins in November will have lasting effects on the country, according to exclusive excerpt from The Rebels. Actually, I'm not really convinced that that's true. It doesn't matter who gets elected. We're all going down this rabbit hole together. The point is the rise of populism is its head is up there again because the public, the population does not see how great the economy is. I don't know why they can't see it, but they don't see it. They're not jumping on board. And this is a problem because it threatens those in control. States proved decisive in 2016 when Trump, running as a right-leaning populist, swept them en route to an upset victory over Hillary Clinton. They were decisive again in 2020 when Biden's left-leaning populism helped pull them back into the Democratic fold. If Trump or Biden sweeps them again in November, he will almost certainly win the White House. Is it going to matter? No. We are at the end of this currency's life cycle. What will matter is what happens after that, and that's why coming together globally in community is so critical. Because unless we do that, we won't have enough voices to say no. We will not accept the garbage that you want to cram down our throats. It's critical. I'm telling you. It's arguably of the mantra probably the single most important thing. But it is a threat to the elites because there are more of us than there are of them. This is critical for you to remember. Globalization is deflationary, deglobalization is inflationary, and the first global deflation has begun, and it's unclear just how painful it will be. Well, frankly, I think a hyperinflationary depression will be extremely painful for most people, but you can protect yourself. The strategy that I developed, and I've been studying currency life cycles since 1987, is based on those repeatable patterns. Your wealth and your ability to barter is protected with these two assets because it has global functionality. So it's critical. You can decide right now how painful you want this transition to be for yourself and your family. You can also decide right now, because wealth never disappears, it just shifts location. So you can decide right this moment to have yourself in a position to have the wealth transfer your way. And you do that by holding your purchasing power. And you do that by positioning into a severely undervalued asset, because this is going to flip-flop. And what's severely overvalued now and what's severely undervalued now, gold, silver, severely undervalued. Everything else severely overvalued. That flip-flops. So if you were in the right place at the right time with the right asset, you can have that wealth shift your way. But a lot of people, they'll ask me the difference between deglobalization and globalization, the difference between inflation and deflation. They're the same coin. They're just the opposite sides of that. And deglobalization makes US inflation worse because all of those cheap salaries and those cheap materials with the dollar stronger against other currencies, which, we hear about and blah, 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 that all goes away with deglobalization. Then you got to bring it here. So go back to 1971 when Nixon said, if you buy American, that inflation won't bother you or impact you at all. But we exported our manufacturing base. We exported our intellectual property. So now we have to deal with the consequences of those choices. And that is highly inflationary because we've got to build the supply chains back here. And what's been happening with salaries with those unions, they've been going up. And we are also in an inflationary environment, which means that the goods cost more too. I hope you're ready for it. I seriously do. Because the only way to fight deflation is with inflation. It's the only way to do it. It's not like you got 1,000 choices. And with the impact of the monetary velocity, the number of times that money changes hands, it peaked in 97. That was the last time that taking on additional debt was actually stimulating throughout the economy. It's been dropping much like a stone since then, up until recently. And if you've been following me for a while, I've told you I'm paying a lot of attention to the monetary velocity, the number of times that money changes hands chart. And when we see it start to rise in a pervasive way, that's the beginning of the hyperinflation. And frankly, I've shown you that just recently. That's what's happening. So, hey, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think I'm wrong. I've been in these markets on some levels since 1964. I've been groomed for this moment in time. You have to get prepared ASAP. But what about the American dream, right? So that's what Ray is talking about. Ray McGuire is that basically the American dream is dead. Now, it's true on so many levels. The aspect that he's coming from is on education. The issue that will determine how our country fares both locally and globally is education. And we used to be premier. I mean, everybody wanted to come here, but that has changed. Illiteracy today reflects the abject failure of leaders in the educational world. And the crisis is today. So this is not something that he's waiting for. Just like I'm not waiting for the reset to happen in the future. The crisis is today. The reset is today. And so we need to be urgent. You need to be urgent with getting your strategy in place and executed. And that's what makes community so important because we no longer have that luxury of time. We don't have that anymore. So there's two communities you got to build. One is locally. Get to know your farmers, your growers, become friends with them, offer your services for a day on the farm, learn some new skills so that if you haven't had time or you don't know how to grow a garden, you can still eat. Because if they have to make choices, who are they going to choose? They're going to choose somebody they know over somebody that they don't know. And globally, so we can stop this surveillance economy from taking away every last bit of freedom that we have. We're talking about the American dream here. People, younger generations have learned that no matter how hard they work, that American dream is so elusive because it was always a lie, because the whole system was based on inflation. This is a $10 trillion Zimbabwe note. What can you buy with it? Absolutely nothing. Nothing. You think that can only happen in Zimbabwe? Well, it's been happening here. It's just been happening slower. And the difference between inflation and hyperinflation is the speed of the inflation. This protects you. Okay, let's move on. The U.S. spends 3% to 5% of the budget on education, and we spend maybe 20% on defense. Both are obviously important, but you can see the delta. And Wars justify inflation. Wars justify more money creation, right? That's used to justify the theft from the population. And people don't realize that inflation is an almost invisible tax on your wealth. But when it happens quickly, they notice. And that's why people are saying, even those that have gotten raises, the increase of their income has not kept pace with the rising costs. And it used to be back in the day that we were in a premier position, and he's talking about educationally. Now we're in a secondary position, and that's eroding even more. And as he says, we're creating a permanent underclass. An underclass. We begin to care when it begins to impact our lives. When those who have less hope begin to encroach on neighborhoods where hope is clearly reflected. So the more affluent neighborhoods. And you see how this populism, it's all interconnected. So just because this guy is saying that guy said something else, can you see how it's really all interconnected? When we see what's happening in the urban world gets closer to the suburban world, then we'll attend to it. But it'll be too late as the boundaries get crossed between those who are educated and have hope and those who are uneducated who have no hope. And people that are hopeless and hungry make choices they would not otherwise make. And that's why having a security plan for food, water, energy, and security itself, wealth preservation, barterability, community, and shelter is critical. It's critical, and it's critical that you get it done right now. Because what he's talking about is really leading to a revolution, just like Ray Dalio's been talking about that forever. And I absolutely agree with him. And that gives me hope. Do I want it to be a violent revolution? No, I do not. How can we revolt and have it not be violent? You vote with your wallets. That's how you do it. If you keep all your wealth in the system, it makes it easy for them to take and it leaves you no choices or options. If you take your wealth out of the system and you have secured all those other aspects of the mantra, they can pound sand. They're not going to have as great an impact on you because you will have choices that support your best interest. You won't have to just cave. Click that Calendly link below. Get your strategy in place and please get it executed. The greatest strategy in the universe means nothing if it's not executed. So here we're going to talk with Katie Koch, and she's talking about the silver tsunami. And you guys can see I have silver hair. So she's not talking about this silver tsunami. She's talking about the aging population and the lack of the new population to support the systems put in place by the old. The largest risk that we see, and the one that we spend the most time on, is longevity risk because people are living a lot longer. So we've got this massive increase in the aging baby boomers, and I'm kind of tail end baby boomers, but at the same time, we're all living longer. When I first became a stockbroker back in the 80s, nobody ever talked about you outliving your assets that you could accumulate, that you had accumulated. Because I remember back then, you had treasury bonds that were yielding 10%. And so if you had $1 million, you could generate 100,000. And today that's paycheck to paycheck. But back in the 70s, when the average wage, or even the 80s, in the 70s, when the average wage was $9,500, you were super wealthy if you had $100,000 income. This person that bought a house for my father, I don't know why I remember. I remember I was standing in the doorway and my parents were talking, and this nice young couple, he was an engineer at ITM, And they had left, and my mother goes, he's a comer. He's a comer. He makes $12,000 a year. So they could afford a nice house from my father. He was young, up and coming. But you think about what $12,000 a year would do right now, you're living under a bridge. So you got to think about that. And that also falls into the American dream, right? But there are various aspects of the first is that lifespan is increasing. The second is how to fund what is now going to be a much longer retirement. So you deposit that money into your 401k. It used to be a defined benefit plan that put the onus on corporations. But after 71, they started coming out with IRAs, 401ks. And so instead of a defined benefit, and notice how close they keep these, it now was a defined contribution. Whatever that benefit is going to be what that benefit is. And if all you can do is convert those assets into this kind of stuff, how does that fund your retirement? So it doesn't. In the strategy that I developed just based upon repeatable patterns, there will be a time to shift into income producing assets, but these are assets that you cannot outlive. If you're counting on Wall Street for those assets, you're going to outlive them. It's just that simple. Even if you have, no matter how much you have in those plans, because if all you can do is convert it into this and nobody wants this anymore, like this $10 trillion Zimbabwe dollar, doesn't do you any good. The plan that we have is just based on history, and it sets it up so that you cannot outlive your retirement dollars that you've put to work. And guess what? You can transfer it to your heirs, at least at this point. I'm not saying they can't change the laws. They've been certainly talking about that for a long time. But even if they do, there are probably ways to work around it because the 1% aren't going to give it up. So that is for more discussion on another day. If you just keep watching, I'll let you know when I'm shifting and what I'm shifting into, and you should then maybe consider the same thing. And at the very moment when that burden has transferred to individuals, we've seen and will continue to see a migration of some of the most attractive income producing assets from public to private markets. And on Thursday, you want to make sure you watch that video because I'm talking about private equity and those private markets. I'm talking about that on Thursday. So what they've done is shift the burden from the corporations to the individuals that are naive and don't understand these markets anyway, took out a lot of the things that could have protected you, took those private, can I say raped on here? Raped the value out of them, and then now they're transferring risk again back to the public. So what do? They narrow the gains to the 1% or the upper class, but then they democratize the losses. I don't think that's right. I don't think that's fair. And I don't think that's necessary. Again, it goes back to the strategy. I mean, what can I tell you? There is a way for you to not get caught up in this mess. As of 2020, for the first time, we had more people over the age of 60 than under the age of 5. And this is going to continue. So many of the programs like Social Security and Medicare and all those things are pay as you go. And we're going to talk more about that in just a second. But The question that you have to ask yourself is, how will you really fund your retirement? And I always like to ask myself, what if I'm right and what if I'm wrong? And if I can do something that doesn't matter whether I'm right or wrong, rock and roll hoochie coo, I'm going to do that every single time. Because if you're counting on this fiat and all these fiat Wall Street products to get you through a comfortable retirement, what if you're wrong? Think about that. Because a lot of the government programs are pay as you go. And that means that it's a Ponzi scheme. You have to keep getting new money in it to support the old money, right? What you're looking at here is the ratio of covered workers and Social Security beneficiaries. And I'm not even really sure how accurate this is, but it goes through 2023. So let's just see that. When they instituted this program, Social Security, back in 1940, there were 159.4 workers to support every single beneficiary. Let's see, that declined quite extensively. By 1955, there were only 8.6 workers, so already down from 159.4 to 8.6, and it's been declining pretty regularly ever since. And there are, going forward, if we don't create more population to go into the workforce to support these pay as you go programs, can you see what I'm saying here? Anybody that's counting on those programs is in deep doo-doo. Deep doo-doo. Now, Social Security revenue and benefits as a percentage of taxable payroll, because that's where they get most of this money, taxable payroll. So it's good with inflation that maybe payrolls are going up because you're going to be paying more into these programs. It's not that you're really making more money, it's that the currency that they're paying you in is worth that much less. But look at what we see when we look at these payrolls. Well, here's 1920 or 2022 right here. Okay? And frankly, I don't really believe this because they're already running deficits in both of these programs. But moving into the future, they just expect that dedicated revenue to stay pretty much the same, flat, at the same time that they anticipate the scheduled benefits to rise. Look at this ginormous gap that will most likely be going up and up and up, especially if we're creating that class, that underclass, right? They aren't going to be making as much money, but of course they're going to be taxed, right? And they're going to be taxed even more. They're anticipating that the trust fund would be exhausted, but it's already running deficits, and that there will be a benefit cut by 20%. So right now they have those benefits kind of tied to the inflation that they kind of massage. So people that are collecting Social Security are getting some level of raises. It doesn't keep pace with inflation, but I mean, what the hey, who cares? These are people that are, not too big to fail. They're just about the right size because they can't really fight on their own. But when you're looking at what's happening in the Social Security arena, the reality is it is going to require cutting those benefits and raising those taxes. And likely those taxes, not just on payroll, but on everything else. Because we certainly are paying a whole lot more than we are just on payroll, right? Couple this with the ongoing inflation, and you're looking at benefits cuts, you're looking at raising your taxes. Well, personally, I think that this really evolves into a massive retirement crisis and maybe even revolution. So you see how all the signs are pointing in the same direction. While you can, protect yourself. Protect your purchasing power while you still can, because you aren't going to even know 1 second before. Central banks and governments do. That's why we've seen them, governments and central banks, buy more gold than ever in history and repatriating their gold. Now, everybody saw, the whole world saw what the US did and the allies did in sanctions against Russia. And they went like, wow, well, if they did it to Russia, maybe they can do it to me too. And so when they refused to send Russia back some of their gold, that Russia had a lot of their gold in house, and that really saved them. But they did a survey, and the survey showed that a substantial share of central banks were concerned by the precedents that had been set. Almost 60% of respondents said that it had made gold more attractive, while 68% were keeping reserves at home compared to that 50% in 2020. And one of the central bankers said, well, we did have it gold held in London, but now we've transferred it back to our own country to hold as a safe haven asset and to keep it safe. Because if you don't hold it, you don't own it. All you own is a contract, and any contract is only as good as the counterparty to that contract. And if they say, nope, too bad, so sad, you can't do anything. You want to hold this stuff? You better hold this in your possession to counter when that goes away. And honestly, it's that simple. And that's what central bankers are doing. Here's that survey. This is the physical gold that's held in foreign central banks. This is 2020, this is now, and this is moving into the future, okay? So you can see that the repatriation has begun. They're pulling it out of those foreign central banks and bullion banks, and they're bringing it home. But this is physical gold held in their own country. And I find this particular graph so interesting because this only looks like a moderate blip. But look at this one. This is 2020. This is today. So I question the accuracy of that. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But my bet is this is much bigger than what they're showing on this because they don't want you to understand what is happening. But these are the smartest guys in the room on what they're doing to their currency, let alone all the geopolitical risk, the new underclass, because if they have their druthers, they will take us back to a feudal economy where you just have a handful of people that own everything and everybody else that rents. Which of those classes do you want to be in? Governments want to have their power. So they're bringing their gold home because they know if you don't hold it, you don't own it. And into the future, they anticipate, more central banks anticipate bringing their gold home. These last two columns are derivatives. They use those derivatives to manipulate the price, the spot market, which is a contract. It's not this market, it's a contract, and then ETFs. But can you see that the lion's share of these central banks are what they're holding is physical gold, not gold ETFs. Because what do they know? Well, they know a lot of things that you don't know, but you should know this. If you don't hold it, you don't own it. Can I say that too often? That's why you have to be able to hold it so that it runs no counterparty risk. You want to make sure to watch our most current videos. The last one was Chaos is Brewing as Yellen declares U.S. economy going to be fine, soft landing, blah, 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 blah. Boy, would I love to sit down and have a conversation with her on air and ask her some questions. Because, look, her job is to lie. Her job is to keep you in the system. Daniela did an amazing interview with Harry Dent. And he's another one I wouldn't mind sitting down and having a conversation with. But they were talking about the nosedive in the S&P 500, so in stocks, because things haven't been resolved even from the banking crisis that happened last March and April. And finally, Taylor Kenny doing a summarized version of the documentary that they did on the Great Taking, which is what I've been talking about for years and years and years. So you want to see all of those interviews, all of those videos, and you want to, if you haven't, start your gold and silver strategy today. Click that Calendly link, make the time, and then get it executed. Because you want to have the right kind of gold and silver in your portfolio. You'll want to hold it yourself. And if you haven't done it yet, please make sure that you subscribe, leave us a comment, give us a thumbs up, and share, share, share. And until next we meet, please be safe out there. Bye-bye.